Good evening, my friends. Welcome to another episode of Outlandish Talmud stories and outstanding life lessons. Tonight's topic is called, What Does Your Name Say About You? I want to thank Liani and Lando Kravitz for dedicating tonight's class in honor of their wedding anniversary. Thank you. Mazal Tov. May God bless you to be able to celebrate many more anniversaries together with good health, lots of peace and nachas from your children, prosperity and success. If you would like to dedicate a class, there's a link in the video description, and I want to thank everybody who's helping dedicate these classes. And when you do that, you help us continue to do what we're doing. So it's a new year, it's a new fiscal year. If your heart is feeling open and generous, you can click on that link and help us out. The source sheet, the link to the source sheet is also there in the video description. Download it. Tonight we are learning another outlandish story indeed, with an outstanding life lesson, of course, as always. And it's a story from the Talmud Yuma, page 83b. So download that source sheet. I want to also say that besides these classes, we're doing a number of other classes here on the Kavana channels. And one of them that we started a few weeks ago was the daily Tanya learning. The Tanya is divided into portions for each day of the year to be completed over a year. And we do about a 10 to 15 minute summary and description of the daily classes. So these are things on the YouTube channel. Press subscribe, you can get it, or on the Facebook page, you can like our page. And you can receive all of these in WhatsApp if you join the WhatsApp link. And I don't have that link with me, but if you want it, let me know and I'll send you the link and you get all that good stuff into your inbox. All right, so I think we're ready to start. L'chaim. In 1944, there was a booklet, a book that was printed, and it was called Kuntras Chicago, which means a collection of teachings from Chicago. What happened in Chicago? So in 1929, the Frierdiker Rebbe, the previous Chabad Rebbe, Rabbi Yosef Yitzchak Schneerson, was doing a tour in America. He was coming from Poland, and he was visiting Jewish communities, Jewish people, connecting with the other side of the world, bringing a lot of chizuk, a lot of strengthening, a lot of inspiration and teachings to the American shores, where Yiddishkeit Judaism at that time was very deficient in America. Perhaps he was also scouting possible opportunities for the future, were it be necessary, which it eventually was, to move his family, his community to safer shores. And he met very many communities and many prominent Jewish people, and a lot of very interesting things happened on that trip. And one could say that a lot of seeds were planted, both that benefited his and his community. The Chabad moved to America in the 1940s, and also it benefited Judaism in general. One of those visits was in Chicago. He spent a significant amount of time in Chicago, and there he had opportunity to deliver many discourses and teach many sichot, many teachings and Torah classes. And they were all transcribed at the time, but they weren't formally printed and published until 1944. In 1944, after him, the previous Rebbe already moved to America, his wife, and then eventually his sons-in-law also arrived. And in 1941, his son-in-law, who was then known as the Ramash, stands for Rabbi Menachem Mendel Schneerson, who at that time was the Rebbe's son-in-law. Later in 1950, he became the successor and the Rebbe. And the Ramash had a number of positions in the Hasidic court. One of them was that he was the head of the publishing society called Kahat. Kahat was very active, very early on, in printing Jewish books in Hebrew, in English, and then eventually in many other languages, because its goal was to be able to disseminate Torah, and especially Hasidic teachings, throughout America, and then throughout the rest of the world. And it's still around today, and you can visit their showroom and their store in Brooklyn, New York, and they have or online. So in 1944, they print the Kuntras Chicago, the Bikur Chicago, the visit, the tour of Chicago. Now, in that book, there is a teaching that the Rebbe recited, and it goes like this. There was about 200 years before then a great rabbi. His name was Rabbi Baruch Mordechai Ettinger, who was known as the Babroisker Rav, the rabbi from Babroisk in Belarus. Rabbi Baruch Mordechai was a Gaon, a genius, a great Torah scholar, and became a Chassid of the Alter Rebbe also. He came from Vilna. So originally he was a grand rabbi in Vilna, and Vilna was the home of the Vilna Gaon, who had lived a little bit before him. And the Vilna Gaon, of course, was the leader of those that opposed the Hasidic teachings in the Hasidic movement. So he was an interesting character in Vilna. Later he moved to Babroisk. Once he was giving a lecture, and he took a Mishnah from Pirkei Avot, teachings of the ethics of our fathers, and it's chapter 4, and it quotes the following teaching in the name of a sage. The sage's name was Akavia ben Mahalalel, Akavia the son of Mahalalel. And he gives a wonderful teaching in the Mishnah. Maybe you're familiar with it. Akavia ben Mahalalel taught, always focus on 3 things, and they'll prevent you from ever sinning, where you come from and where you're going to, etc. Who was the Akavia ben Mahalalel? He was. We'll get to talk about him a little later. But when Rabbi Baruch Mordechai taught this, he added a Hasidic spiritual twist. And he said, well, let's look at the name, and let's see what the name implies. Akavia, the word Akavia comes from the Hebrew word Akev. Akev means a heel. So find the heel, the bottom of your body, the bottom of your foot. And then Mahalala, the father of Mahalala, comes from the word Hallel. Hallel means to sing, to praise, to pray to God. And so he interpreted in Yiddish that Akavia, the son of Mahalala, which is the name, can also mean in Yiddish the Piate von der was erlaubt dem Eibishten, the heel of somebody who prays and praises with great glory and great joy and commitment to God, can teach the following teaching. And he explained that when somebody is on the level of being the Mahalalel, the person who is dedicating their heart, their soul, their energies towards praise of God and singing and prayer and all kinds of glorious emotional and rapture in dedicating themselves to God, then even their piata, even their heel, which is the lowest part of them, is far greater, far higher than another person who isn't committing their life to that kind of path. And that was the teaching that he taught at the time. And the previous Rabbi in his talk in Chicago quoted that teaching. And that was printed in 1944. Well, a bunch of letters, a lot of letters came in to the office at Kahas, which was addressed to the Ramash at the time, who was going to be the Lubavitcher Rebbe. A lot of letters of complaint. And there were 2 schools of thought. One was from the Misnagdik, from the anti-Hasidic camp. And they said, what's going on over here? What are the Hasidim doing to the Torah? They're taking the simple, the genuine meaning of the Torah, and they're adding all of their Baba Mises, they're adding spiritual twists, which have nothing to do with the original and genuine intent of the Torah. A name, Akavia, the son of Mahalel, suddenly becomes the heel of somebody who's a praiser of God. This is not the way to study Torah. This is not the way to interpret things. This is detracting, taking away, distorting genuine meaning of the Torah. That was one group of complaints. Another group of complaints came within the Hasidic community, and they said, we really shouldn't be publishing and publicizing these kinds of teachings, because even if we engage in them and we enjoy them, but for the wider world to see them, it doesn't bring a lot of respect to the Hasidic teachings, to the Hasidim, to those that are adding their spiritual twist to the Torah, because it sounds a little bit outlandish, it sounds a little bit of a distortion. Those were the complaints that were coming to the Rebbe. And so the Rebbe penned a letter that became a public letter. It could be he wrote it to someone in specific, but it's printed in his books of letters. And he says, I want to explain why you're all wrong. And I want to show you the validity and the accordance with Jewish tradition about how Rabbi Baruch Mordechai of Babroisk interpreted that Mishnah. And that leads into tonight's topic, which is a discussion about your name. What is your name? What does your name mean? Where does your name come from? Who gave you your name? Why do you have that name? Do you like your name? Do you use your name? We know in the Jewish tradition, we give a boy and a girl a Jewish name when they're born. We have Jewish names. We give a girl at the Torah ceremony or a boy at his Brit Milah, we give them a Jewish name. Now, it's been for a while a custom that people receive a Jewish name and then they receive also a non-Jewish name. So maybe the boy is named Shimon Eliyahu and then he's called Charles. And then the girl maybe is named Rachel Leah and she's called Diana. Could be anything. And some people will use their Jewish name, some people won't use, they'll use their secular name. We've come to a point in times that a lot of boys and girls growing up and they have names like Andrew and Peter and Stephen, and they come towards their bar mitzvah, their bat mitzvah, they really don't even know their Jewish name. So that's a little sad. So what's the importance of a name? I mean, a name, if you could argue the name really is not that important. A name is only necessary for others to refer to, some way for them to call you. If you lived on your own in the world, on your own in an island, would you need a name? If no one needs to call you, what's the point of your name? So a name seems to be a very technical thing to give a point of reference to someone else. Is there more value? Is there more meaning? Is there more power to a name? Gary, you're asking, is there more, am I discussing Hebrew names or English names? So I'm really discussing both. But the truth is the focus of today, especially if we're going to get into the traditional text and the spiritual teachings, we're mainly going to be talking about the power, the influence of a Jewish name, as you're going to see. Good question. So I want to learn with you and figure out how a name truly is very indicative. A name has a lot of power. A name has a lot of influence. And when you use your name right, and when you're proud of your name, and when you connect with your name, or when you're selective about your name, and maybe it's possible to change your name. Perhaps some people don't like the name they were given. They want to change. They want to add names. And we have in our tradition this ceremony of sometimes changing names for different reasons. Why? What is so important about a name? Okay, so let's go straight to our story for tonight. It's a story from Talmud Yoma 83b. I'm going to read it. I hope you have it in the source sheet with you. Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Yossi were walking on the road together. Rabbi Meir would analyze names and discern one's nature from his name, while Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Yossi were not apt to analyzing names. So we see here already a disagreement among the great sages. Rabbi Meir was very into names. From a person's name, he would start to learn all about you just from your name, whereas the others didn't take it seriously. It's a name, nothing more than that. Now, when they came to a certain place, they looked for lodging and were given it. It happened to be late Friday afternoon, and they had to stay somewhere for Shabbat. They were on the road. So they found an inn, and they said to the innkeeper, "What is your name?" And he said to them, "My name is Kidor." Rabbi Meir said to himself, either to himself, or he said, not too loud, maybe the others heard, maybe they didn't hear. Perhaps one can learn from this that he's a wicked person. A name like Kidor sounds like you're a wicked person. Why? Because it says in the verse in Deuteronomy, in the verse of the curses, it says there, "For they are a generation of upheavals." In Hebrew, ki dor tahapochot ema. Two different words. Ki, that, dor, a generation of tahapochot, of upheaval, they are. The two words of ki, dor, two separate words can become Kidor. And Kidor is taken from a verse that talks about a nation, a generation that's a nation of upheaval, of disruption, of disturbance, of lack of conforming to safe, sensible societal standards. So Rabbi says, I don't like this guy. Kidor is no good. However, it was Friday afternoon. They had to stop somewhere for Shabbat. So they said, well, we got to stay here anyhow. Now, Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Yossi, remember, they didn't really agree with Rabbi Meir. Just because he has a name Kidor doesn't mean you can conclude that he's a lousy guy. So they took their money belts, their purses, which they were muktzah on Shabbat. You couldn't carry them, you couldn't use them. So they entrusted their purses to the innkeeper. Hey, could you please mind this for us for Shabbat, and we'll collect it after Shabbat, which he gladly took, as you'll soon see. Rabbi Meir did not entrust his purse to him. Nuh-uh, not him. And went and placed it at the grave of the innkeeper's father. There must have been a cemetery nearby. Rabbi Meir put the money, the purse, by the grave. Maybe, I guess that's a safer place. People don't generally hang out by graves. Now, the innkeeper's father appeared to the innkeeper in a dream and said to him, "Go take the purse placed at the head of that man," in other words, myself. Right? So if Kedor is a lousy guy, his father's even more of a lousy guy. It runs in the family. These things don't happen by themselves. You can probably trace it in the family genes. Now, the Kedor doesn't take this very seriously. I mean, it's a dream that his father comes to him and tells him something absurd about getting money from his gravesite. So the following day, Kedor, the innkeeper, turns to the sages and says, "This is what appeared to me in my dream. Let me tell you what happened." So they said to him, Rabbi Yosef and Rabbi Yehuda for sure, because Rabbi Meir, I'm not sure what he thought about this dream, but they said, dreams during twilight on Shabbat evening have no substance and should not be trusted. It's a dream. Don't take it so seriously. Don't make the trip out to the graveyard. It's not, you got nothing to gain from there. Let it go. Even so, Rabbi Meir was more concerned over here, because now the wicked guy, the father, is getting involved. So Rabbi Meir went and guarded his money all that day and then took it. So Rabbi Meir went to the cemetery, stood there a whole day, protecting his money. When Shabbat ended, he picked up the purse and he came back to the inn. Sunday morning, the rabbis are getting ready to leave, continue their journey. They came to the innkeeper and they said, "Give us our purses. We're checking out." He said to them, "Your purses? What purses? These matters never occurred. I don't know what you're talking about. I don't have any purses." It really was Kedor, a person of upheaval. So now they're at a loss. They have no money. They've been robbed. Rabbi Meir said to them, "Why didn't you analyze his name to learn that he's a wicked man? I told you, Kedor. How could you trust a person with a name like Kedor?" They said to him, "Rabbi Meir, why did the master tell us? I mean, if you knew about this and you didn't deposit your purse with him and you went and hid it in the cemetery to keep it safe, you could have protected us and told us." So he said to them, "I said one should be suspicious, but have I said a person should be established as wicked? Could I say to you with certainty that he's a wicked based on his name alone?" Rabbi Meir says something very important. It's true that I had a hunch based on his name that he's not a trustworthy guy. At the same time, just because that is my intuition, that's what the indication of his name is, doesn't mean for guaranteed, for sure, that's the way he behaves. So I couldn't come out and say clearly to you guys, you cannot trust him, and then and request of you or suggest to you to do something absurd like I did, which is put the money in the cemetery. I didn't want to come out so forcefully, but I had that hunch and I was right. Now they want to get their money back. So what did they do? They dragged the innkeeper and brought him to a store, to a bar, and they gave him wine to drink. They're doing an experiment, the test. They're setting him up over here. First, they want to get him drunk. So they give him lots of wine. And after he drank the wine, and he's taking a napkin and he's wiping himself, as he's wiping himself and he's in a state of inebriation, not even noticing what's going on, they saw lentils in his mustache. He must have had a very bushy beard, a bushy mustache, and those lentils that he'd previously eaten were hiding somewhere in his beard. But now that he's wiping himself up and he's less guarded, they see lentils there. So now they have what they're looking for. What's their plan? They went and gave this sign to his wife. They said to the wife, "Your husband has ordered for you to give us our purses of money. How are you going to know it's true? How do we know that your husband? So we'll give you a sign. The sign the husband has told us to pass on to you is that he ate lentils this morning." They found lentils in his mustache. So how would anyone know what he ate this morning? No one was in the house. The fact that they know, the wife says, "Well, seems like you're right." So she gives them their purses. They took their purses and they went on their way. Thank God they retrieved their money. When Kedor, the innkeeper, this wicked guy, as we've already learned and we'll learn more, when he discovered what happened, he went and he killed his wife out of anger. Nasty guy. But Rabbi Meir was right. Kedor was a nasty guy. And Rabbi Meir knew it from his name. Now the Talmud concludes, in the end, They too, Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Yossi, would also analyze names. I think this trip convinced them. Rabbi Meir has a point. A name clearly is indicative of somebody and their character and their personality. And so they said, we need to be careful about names as well. We agree with Rabbi Meir now. Now there's no dispute about it. Everybody agrees with it. In fact, when they came to a house of a landlord named Bala, another one of their journeys, and the person's name was Bala, they said, we're not going in here. We're staying out of here. Why? What's so scary about the name Bala? Because we can conclude from here that this person is certainly wicked. How so? Because there's a verse in Yecheskel, in Ezekiel chapter 23, verse 43, that says, it's in Hebrew, I have the original Hebrew, V'omar la Bala ne'ufim ata yiznu taznuseh havihi. I said of her who was worn out by adulteries. Bala means to be tired, to be exhausted. And in the context of Yecheskel, Bala means a person who's dedicated their life to sexual immorality, and they've aged and they're exhausted from all of their promiscuous behavior. And it says in the book of Genesis, after I am grown old, shall I have a pleasure? Sarah says about herself, when God gives a blessing, you're going to have children. She's 90 years old. Acharei beloti, same word, bala beloti. My body is no longer is exhausted. It's worn out. It's getting old. So the word bala seems to imply becoming exhausted and tired from adulteries, from sexual promiscuity, and therefore they said we're staying out of this person's house. They agree with Rabbi Meir. A name says a lot about the person. And that's the conclusion of the outlandish story. What can we learn from this story? What does it mean to you and I? What's in your name? What does it even mean that a name is random? A name was chosen. I mean, maybe you were named after somebody special in the family, or maybe your parents liked a certain name or a certain person, they gave it to you. But what's the connection of the name to you? And if you were to change your name, would you become different? I mean, today you're Moshe, tomorrow you want to be Yitzchak, you become Yitzchak. What's going to change within you? You're still the same person from within. A name is a very superficial, external title about yourself. Or is it not? From Rabbi Meir, and then subsequently from Rabbi Yossi and Rabbi Yehuda, we're understanding from the Talmud that there's a lot to be understood and to be studied in the name of a person. Let's go through this step by step and explore some of our sources, traditional texts, to understand this better. Where does this come from, and what is the meaning of the power of a name? First of all, in the very opening chapters of the Torah, in the book of Bereshit, we find that God creates everything, and he creates all the living species, from fish to animals to birds, and then eventually humans, Adam and Chava. And we find that everything is created, but nothing has a name yet, right? The camel is created, but doesn't have a name called camel. So every species is created with no name yet, and every individual animal is created without any name yet. How does everything get its name? Do you recall the story in Bereshit? There's a very interesting verse and an even more interesting midrashic teaching on that verse that talks about how the name of species were given at the beginning of time. In chapter 2, verse 19 and 20, the Torah says that God creates all of the animals and the birds from the earth. And then he brings Adam, he brings the human, Adam's already created, to see what we should call those animals. And whatever name Adam gave, that became the name of the animal. Gary, you're saying Adam. Tell me what your comment or question is. I want to address it. So Adam is the one that gives the name to all the animals and their species. Why is it Adam's job? Why doesn't God give the name? Why doesn't someone else give the name? So the Medrash has a fascinating commentary story that happened over here. And the Medrash Rabbi in Bereshit chapter 17 says as follows. I'm going to read the English. Rabbi Acha taught, when God created the world and all of the animals and all of the birds and the fish, he first consults with the angels, and he says, let us make man. So the angels agree, fine, they make man. And then they say, what is the big deal about this man? Everyone's talking about the human. What's the mativoi? What is so great about the person? What's the nature? What's the character of this person? So God says, be very careful. Don't downplay the human being. In fact, the human being, Adam, that is created, is even wiser than you, angel. How so? I'll show you. God says, I have an issue over here. And I have all these animals that I've created, but they didn't have any names. Here, let me bring all the animals before you. I want you to give them a name. So he brings this kind of animal, and that kind of animal, and this bird, and this fish. And he asks the angels, please, what is their name? And the angels say, oh, we didn't create them. We didn't know their names. God says, well, look, I'm going to do the same test now with Adam. Let me task Adam with giving them their names. So he passes all the animals in front of Adam. And Adam says, okay, that group, that species, they look, I'm going to call them shor, which means oxen. And that species, chamor, the donkeys. That species, sus, horse. That species, gamal, camel. And he goes through and he names all of the animals in their original Hebrew name. And then when he finishes, God asks him, and what's going to be your name, sir? He says, I think you should call me Adam. And God says, why? Here it implies that Adam gave himself his own name, Adam, and God asks him why. And he says, because Adam comes from the word Adama, which means the earth, the ground, that I was fashioned and created from the earth in the ground. God is very impressed. And God tells Adam, and what should you call me? What's my name? Asks God. And Adam answers him, you would be, a good name to call you would be Adon. Adon means master, because you're the master over all creations and all of creation. That's the medrash. What do we learn from here? The angels were given an opportunity to name all the species. Now, if naming was just about this arbitrary kind of guess or creative work of just coming up with names, that's not so difficult. Anyone could do that. You can come up with the most random, crazy names, whatever you want. I mean, nothing has a name over it. No word would even sound strange, or all words sound as strange as the other. Yet the angels say, no, we cannot name it. We don't know how to. And then Adam, who has greater wisdom than the angels, he knows how to name them. What's the big wisdom in naming and choosing a name? Answer is that we see this great wisdom in naming a name. Why? Because a name is not just a random, arbitrary selection or decision. A name seems to be the real name. When you're presented with this species, it has a name, it has a title, it has a classification, a label that is most descriptive of what it is. And you need to discover what that is. You can't decide on your own what the name is. You need to figure out what is its name so you can call it by its name. In other words, every existence, every species, every living thing has innately a name. A name is part and parcel of who it is. And for somebody to give it its name, it requires somebody to understand and see inside of it, what is it? What is its name that we shall call it by? That's what we've learned right away. In fact, the Sforno commentary, which I saw the other day, says, Adam, what was he looking for to give a name? So that he would see which name would be appropriate for each creature based on the specific tasks they performed in the universe. So it's first of all about their nature and about their persona that has a particular name to it. And it's also about what they're going to accomplish. And because of this particular contribution and achievement they're going to have in life, that tells you what their name is. So at this point, we have learned that the name of all species was very particular, was a real thing, so much so nobody could make up any names, and the angels were unable to name them, and only Adam, with his great wisdom and intuition and spiritual foresight, was able not just to randomly select a name, but rather, or make up a name, but rather to identify what their real names are. Let's go further. What about specific names? What about specific names? So within every species, there's the individuals. These species of camels, but every camel has a name. Every fish, every bird, all different kinds of birds. Every mosquito has a name. What about humans? We know Adam is the name for the human species, human beings. But what about this particular person and that particular person? Are their names also very significant? Or that already, the myriads of individuals within a particular species, you can give any name you want. The general classification of Adam describes the nature, their persona, the role, the character, the description of what human beings are. And every human being is a human being, and then the individuals were all a little different than each other and have a different character trait and a different mission and a different abilities, and then you can already choose arbitrary names, or not. So we're going to learn that every specific name of every specific individual and every specific living thing is also a very deliberate, meaningful name. Where do we see that? Again, classic text in the Torah. Think about this. Let's start off with the first woman that was created. Chava. How did she get the name Chava? So Adam was the name not just for him as a person, but for all the species. We're called human beings. But Chava was a name just for that woman. And the Torah says she's called Chava ki ein kol chai. She's the mother of all life. Chava describes the first woman as being the first mother, the first progenitor of all women, of all children, of all offspring. So her name described what her role was in this world. That was her specific name. Then we have many generations later, Avram, Sarai. When they were born, they were given the name Avram and Sarai. Avram meant Avram, an exalted father, or the father of Aram. That implied that he was a leader kind of person for his local community of Aram. Sarai means a woman who is of royalty, a princess, a queen. But Sarai, she's mine, she's ours, she's a leader again within her particular community. And then at some point later, God says, we need to change your name. Avram is going to become Avraham, meaning you're Avraham, you're the father of Kol Ha'olam Kulo, you're now the father of the entire world. You, with your discovery of God, are not just going to be an influencer of your particular community, but you're going to be an influencer of all people. Like we see today, billions of people in the world are all products of Abraham, who discovered God. And Sarai will no longer be Sarai, will be Sarah. Sarah is not just a local, particular small queen of a small people, mine, but it's rather Sarah. It's the queen, the mother of royalty. Again, all in the Torah, giving those names and the descriptions of who they were. We find that when Yaakov is born, Yaakov and Esau, Yaakov, interestingly, why was he called Yaakov? Gary says that Parah gave a new name to Yosef. That's good. It's correct. Yosef became Tzafnat Paneach, who was the revealer of that which is hidden. Very true. And because he interpreted the dreams. And he was able to see deep and see which nobody else could see. Very good. It's another description. Yaakov gets his name because when he was being born together with Esau, he was supposed to be the first twin to come out, but then Esau raised the head, and then Yaakov grabs the heel of Esau, as we know the story. So Akev means a heel, so he gets the name Yaakov. But not just a heel. Later, when, remember the story when Yaakov steals the blessings from Esau, first he steals the firstborn right, and then he steals the blessings for the firstborn, which he probably deserved anyhow. But Esau turns around and he says, Vayakveni ze pa'amayim. He's a person who his name implies. His name Akev means a tricker. Somebody who tricks people, a deceiver. He's now deceived me twice. He stole my firstborn right, and he stole my blessings. The name Yaakov again is being used to indicate his character. And then he gets another name, Yisrael. If you recall, he's traveling back after 22 years in Lavan's house and building his family. Now he's coming back to face Esau, his brother Esau, for the first time in 22 years. And then on the way there, he has a battle with one of the angels, and he wins, and the angel gives him a name, Yisrael, that becomes his name. Why Yisrael? Kisarita imalakim, because he fought valiantly with the angel of God, Batuchal, and you overcame. You're a strong warrior. You're always going to have the upper hand, and that's the name Israel. So we have so many examples in the Torah where names of people are given to them because that is descriptive of who they are and what their character is. I'm going to talk about Ruth in a moment, a bit later. Ruth, the famous convert, and the Medrash talks about Ruth's family. So remember, she marries into a family. The mother and father was Elimelech was the father, and Naomi was the mother, and then the two sons, Machlon and Kilyon. So there's a whole medrash that describes their names also. Why is Elimelech called Elimelech? Eli Melech. It stands for, to me is the kingship. He says, I deserve to be the leader, the ruler, which is why he doesn't get it, that kind of honor in Israel, so he moves to Moab. His wife's name, Naomi. Naomi comes from the word Noam Ne'ima, which means pleasant. She was a real sweetheart of a woman. Maybe she didn't have the best husband. I mean, he was a righteous person, but she was a real pleasant person. And then the two children, Machlon and Kilyon. Machlon comes from the word Nimoach, somebody who dissolved, somebody who disappeared. He passed away. In Moab, and Kilyon also means destruction. He too passes away. I could go on and on. There are so many examples. I'm thinking about this also this week because we start to read the Torah portion of Shemot and the new book of the Torah. And the way the new book of the Torah opens up, it says, Ve'ele Shemot b'nei Yisrael. These are the names of the Jewish people who came down to Egypt. And the Torah lists 70 names. It doesn't just say Jacob and his family came. These are the names of the people who came down to Egypt. The Torah is so specific to mention their names. That's why I was thinking about the importance of names. And there's a medrash that says that the names of all the 12 sons of Jacob, which are listed as now coming down to Egypt, which will lead to the eventual slavery in Egypt, and only many centuries later, after much torture and destruction, will the Jews become freed from Egypt. But therefore, going into Egypt, we're told these names. Why? Because these names each have a quality of redemption in them. And therefore, these names are very powerful. Reuven, the first son, comes from the name Ra'isi. I have seen, says God. I've seen your pain and your affliction. Shimon comes from the word Shmiya, to hear. God says, I have heard your cries, which is why I'm redeeming you. Levi comes from the word Livui, to be escorted and to be attracted and coming together. And the nation will come together and march towards the state of Israel. Yehudah comes from the word Hoda'ah, to admit, to thank God and to recognize. And we turn to God and we say, we know that what you did was the right thing, even though it was painful, and we're thankful for that. Yisachar comes from the word schar, which means reward. And for all the pain and suffering we had in Egypt, there's going to be plenty of reward for that. And all the names, I'm not going to go through them all right now. So this is clear that names are very powerful and have a lot of description about who a person is. We find that throughout the Torah, and the Talmud and the Medrash are filled with such examples. I've only brought you just a few. Now, you may say, I understand if it's a name in Scripture, a name in the Torah, and the Torah is very specific. So if the Torah mentions a name of a particular person, it's not just random, but rather there's something very intentional. A name in the Torah, I get it, that has a lot of power, a lot of influence, a lot of description, very telling about a person. However, after the Torah, in other words, names that are in the Talmud, and names of generations that moved into Israel no longer, well, after the times of the Tanakh closed. So towards the times of the Second Temple, and then the post that time, and the times of the Talmud, and for the names for the last 2,000 years, who says those names are also so significant? Maybe it's not all names. Maybe it's just names that are included in the Holy Scripture. But it's my name and your name and the names for the past 2,000 years. And do they have the same value, the same properties to them? So here we see that they do. They do. The source of that is a Talmud in Brachot, page 7b. Talmud says, from where do we know that a name of a person is very telling? Rabbi Eliezer teaches it comes from a verse in Tehillim from King David. The verse says, "L'chu chazu mifalot Hashem, go out and see the great wonders of the Lord, asher sam shamot ba'aretz, who placed destruction, desolation in the land." What does that mean? So the commentaries have the Talmud has a hard time. What are you seeing? The wonders of God and the destruction, desolation of the land. So the Talmud says Shamot can be read Shemot, not desolation, but names. By seeing the names of the people and of all of living creatures in the land, in the world, you can discover the wonders of God. The name can show you something great about that person and about God who created that person. Our story for tonight, our outlandish story with Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yosef and Rabbi Yehuda, And this guy Kidor, the innkeeper, who Rabbi predicts is an evil person based on the origins of his name, and he's right. And then Rabbi Yosef and Rabbi Yehuda are convinced as well. Kidor is not a person from the time of the Torah. Kidor is an innkeeper in the times of the Talmud, 2,000 years ago. And yet, and that wasn't even a Jewish name. It wasn't even a Jewish person necessarily. However, you still see that the name has that kind of power. It's very telling. In fact, a name, this is a very important point. In addition, a name is not just telling you something about a person. Like we said, that the name Yaakov tells me that Yaakov was a deceiver. At least he did his holy operations in a deceiving way. And the name Chava implies she's the mother of all species, of all humans. And the name, all the names that it's more than that. It's not just a name tells you about a person, but a name, in fact, influences a person. A name causes you to be who you're going to be. That's the extent of the power of your name. How do we know that? There's a clear teaching in the Medrash Tanchuma. The Medrash Tanchuma in the portion of Hazino says, listen carefully, Lo'olam yivdok adam b'shemot l'kol lebeno. When you give birth to a child, parents, listen up carefully. Be very careful. Do a lot of research. Be very thoughtful and considerate about what kind of name you're going to give your child. Why? You want a name, Hara'ul liyot tzaddik, a name that will enable the child to be a righteous person. Ki lefamim Hashem gorem tov or gorem ra. Because a name can cause a person to be pious and righteous, or can cause a person to be wicked and evil. Like we find by the Meraglim, by the spies, and here's the Medrash goes into all the names of the spies that Moses sent to scout the land of Israel, and many of those spies failed in their mission, and the Medrash identifies that their names are what caused them to fail, which is why we find by one of them, by Yehoshua, who was the student of Moses, he did not fail, him together with Caleb, but before he leaves, Moses changes his name to protect him. He used to have a name of Hoshea, and Moses adds a Yud at the beginning, so he becomes Yehoshua. Now he has God's name in his name, the Yud and the Hey. God should save him, and now we understand. Changing his name actually changed who he was and who he could be and how he's going to function and how he's going to deal with this mission, and he ends up succeeding, unlike most of the others. How amazing. The name has so much power over you. Gary comments, Moshe was named by Pharaoh's daughter. Very good point. The name Moshe, Moses, our great leader, and it actually wasn't given to him by his parents. At least, it's not clear in the Torah that way, but the Medrash tells us that that's the case. And the Torah does say, because his name, I drew him out of the water, and the word Moshe comes from drawing out, and the daughter of Pharaoh, Batya, drew him out of the water. What was his real name, by the way? So the Medrash has like 7 different opinions what his real name was. But yeah, interesting that we use an Egyptian name or Egyptian given name for Moshe. But again, that became his accepted name, and that name had influence on him. And in fact, there's a lot of teachings about how the concept of being drawn out of the water, in other words, saving somebody, in other words, taking that which is buried underneath the water and is not visible and bringing it out and making it visible and revealed, all of these traits really describe the work, the leadership, the prophetic work of Moses. So yes, it's a very powerful name as well. What's the explanation for this? What does it mean that the name has so much power over you? You know, my name is Eliezer. I was actually named after my grandfather's brother, who passed away, who was killed during the war. But as a child growing up, I was always known as Eli, a short abbreviation of my name, Eliezer. When I was a student in a yeshiva in Israel, I was studying my nights. It was very late, I remember. It was close to midnight. And somebody walked in. I never saw the person before, which is common people walk in. But this guy sat down next to me, and he started to present himself and started to talk. And I noticed this guy is not an average person. He was very learned and very wise, and he was a Kabbalist. He was quoting a lot, teaching a lot of Kabbalah. He was going, anyway, we studied together for a long time. And at some point he came to my name and he asked me, what's my name? And I said, Eli. He said, that's what you were named at your Brit Milah when you were born? I said, no, I was named Eliezer. He says, Chaval, you have to use your name Eliezer. When you don't use your full name, you are denying yourself of so much blessing, so much potential that you could have, that your name will give you only if you use it. Don't shortchange yourself and use half your name. And that is an interesting consideration for people who have Jewish names and secular names. I think your Jewish name has a lot of power. And if you would use it more and identify with it more, it would also allow you to discover your full potential and opportunities. So let's take a step back. Let's understand this. Why is a name so powerful? What's in a name? The Talmud in Brachot, page 55, says a very interesting cryptic teaching. We know that when God instructed Moses to build the tabernacle in Egypt, we had to appoint someone to oversee the project, a general contractor, right? An architect, designer. So, who was chosen? Bezalel. Bezalel, the son of Uri, the son of Hur, he was chosen. Why? Why him? So typically we understand because he was a gifted person. He was good with his hands, he was good with his eyes, he was good at design. Then the Torah says he also had a lot of spiritual qualities to him. He could identify, he could understand the true intention of what God wanted. But then the Talmud says something a little different and outlandish. The Talmud says, Rabbi Yehuda says in the name of Rav, Bezalel was chosen because he knew how to combine the letters with which the heavens and earth had been created. He knew how to access the letters of creation. What does that mean? This is something discussed at great length in Kabbalah and in Hasidic teachings, but on one foot. How was the world created? So if you pay attention to the first chapter in Genesis, you know that it doesn't say God fashioned the world with his hands, but it says God fashioned the world with his mouth. He spoke the world into being. Vayomer Elokim, and God said, Yehi or, let there be light, and there was light. And God said, let there be vegetation, and there was vegetation. Let there be man, and there was man. Everything was through God's mouth. That's why God's different than we are. We cannot create with our mouths. For us to create something, we need to build it with our hands or our feet. If we said something, we say something all the time. I want there to be a good business. I want there to be a sale. I could want from the end till tomorrow. All I'm going to do is talk about it, but not make it happen. It's not going to happen. By the way, I don't want to get carried away over here, but the truth is humans are a little bit godlike, and your words are very powerful, and you can build or destroy a lot of things through your words. You can build people's moods and self-esteem or love, or the opposite, destroy them with your words. So your words can create a lot of things, but I don't want to get carried away. This is not the point right now. So the world was created through words and letters. Meaning, there are 22 letters in the Hebrew alphabet, Aleph through to Tav. What's unique about the Hebrew alphabet and the Hebrew language, the original Hebrew language, Lashon HaKodesh, the whole language of the Torah, is that it's different than every other language. Every other language is a man-made language. English, French, Spanish, Russian, it's all human. Somebody came up with the language. Lashon HaKodesh was a God-made language. The language existed before the world was created. It's the language that God thinks in, the language that God spoke. It's the language that God used to speak the world into existence. The way that God channels his infinite creative forces to be able to create are through letters and words. Letters and words are couriers transporting the light and the spiritual creative force of God to create. Take a simple example, because we also see how letters and words can transport and be couriers of ideas. So if you write the letter B on a piece of paper, what do you have from that? Not very much. You put a letter E next to it, you don't have very much either. Put a letter D next to it, and all of a sudden you have a word. You have bed, and you know what bed is. I don't know why I'm thinking about bed right now. Or maybe it's obvious, but notice what happened over here. You took three entities that have no value in and of themselves, other than sounds, but you put them together and you created a whole meaning. So the human who decided that BED should spell bed and mean this thing you lie on and go to sleep on, look how it was created. So in a much greater way and in a very spiritual way, that happens with words and letters that God utters as well. So every letter of the Hebrew alphabet is a courier, is transporting a divine spiritual light. The letter itself has a certain light to it, a certain spiritual power to it. And then the way that you juxtapose letters together, you put letters in a certain order, and you put these three letters together, and you'll create, just like with words, you would create a whole word. And then if you put a number of words together, you create a whole sentence. And if you put a number of sentences together, you can create a whole paragraph. And you put a few paragraphs together and you create a chapter. And you put a few chapters together and you create a whole book. And you put a few books together and you create a whole sequel, a whole series, etc., etc. So think about that in a spiritual way. If every letter contains within it a spiritual creative force, the light of Hashem, then putting those several letters together creates the following entity. So for example, take the word shor. Shor means the ox. Adam sees this animal and he says, I know that its name is Shor. How do you know that? So you can interpret it in many ways. But the way it's described in the deep Kabbalistic teachings, and the Alter Rebbe and the Tanya talks about this also at great length, Adam saw that the creative forces, the building blocks that make this animal exist is because there are the manifestations of divine creative light that are expressed through the letter Shin, to the letter Vav, to the letter Resh, and in that order, Shin, Vav, Resh coming together to create Shor, and the combination and the juxtaposition of these lights, these creative forces coming together, results in this entity, this animal you see in front of your eyes, the ox. And the same can be said with every other general species and also every individual. In other words, the name is not just an arbitrary title or label. The name is the letters and the divine spiritual forces, creative forces, that make you into who you are. That's what a name is. And when you refer to your name, when you call a name, if you know how to say a name, right? You can say names in different ways. Your tone, your intention. Sometimes using a name could be very rough and very harsh, or using a name could be very loving and endearing. So there's so many different ways that you can use a name. If you know how to use a name right, you can access the true spiritual forces and energies within the letters and that word, and you're tapping into the very energies that create you and bring you into existence. And that name becomes the very existence of your soul, of your life, of the fusion of body and soul together, which is the person that you are. Which is why you may know about a tradition. When somebody's very ill, chas v'shalom, we're praying they should get better and the prayers are not working. There is a ceremony where we do called Shinui Hashem. We change the person's name. It used to be that we actually changed the person's name. So if the person's name was Leah, we'll change her into Rivka. Nowadays, we don't really change so much, but we add a name. If her name was Leah, we'll add Chaya Leah. That's just an example, but Chaya means life. It's very common to add that. Or if a person's name is Yaakov, we'll add a name Raphael. Raphael means healing. What is achieved through changing someone's name? What's achieved through adding a name? At a simple level, the answer is as follows. If this person whose name is Leah and is very ill, it may just be in heaven, there's a decree against this person called Leah that she should die. Well, I got news for you, God. This person's not Leah anymore. This person is Chaya Leah. So you got the wrong person. Leah is supposed to die, but this is not Leah. This is Chaya Leah. You're telling God this person's a different person, not the person who was decreed to die. On a deeper level, on a more Kabbalistic level, what does it mean? the forces of Lamed, Aleph, Hey, Leah coming together to give life or to give the kind of divine treatment to this person, and now it's not working in the best of ways because she's very ill and possibly dying. Well, you manipulate, you alter those forces because you bring new names, new letters, new energies into the mix. And through bringing that, you can alter the path, alter the course, alter the nature of this person's life and their destiny, all through changing a name. Now, changing a name is not so simple, meaning it should come with a change of character, a change of behavior. So it's, right, you can ask a question. I'm Eliezer. Now, I'm sure there's another Eliezer in the world. There are. We just encountered one actually in our text, if you recall. That person is not the same as me. I hope not. So everyone has the same name as the same? I don't know. Because there are very, very, very many variables. Your name and the letters which create you, of course, a big part of your story and a big influencer on your soul, on your life, on your character. But there's many other layers involved over here. How much access are you getting into your name? And how does it play out within other forces and other influences of your life? And there are so many parts to this that the way it's playing out in my life and the way I'm accessing my name and the way it's triggering and reacting with other forces and influences, both material, physical, and spiritual, is very different than the other Eliezer. So that person's going to end up being a very different person than I am. But the fact that we have the same name does mean that there's something within us that is identical. We're going to be very different, the way it plays out eventually. But we are recipients of very similar spiritual forces from God. That's a fact. Sure. So we should take names very seriously. Our names very seriously. The Arizal, the great Kabbalist Rabbi Glorious, says that before parents give children a name, so how do you choose a name? So it may be a name that you like, thought about it. Or maybe a name of a grandfather or grandmother. If you're Sephardi, they're still alive. If you're Ashkenazi, they passed away. You think you know why you're naming that name. But the truth is, the night before you name that child, says the Arizal, a parent is granted Ruach HaKodesh. A person is granted with this Holy Spirit that is giving them a prophecy. You're being told the name. You're not guessing. You're not deciding your child's name. Your child has a name. You need to just figure it out. And you're being given a prophecy to figure it out. And as we learned from the Medrash earlier, you have to be very careful what you name your child. Don't name a name that you like, meaning that's just going to benefit you, make you feel good. You have to name that the child that what the name truly is, and one that's going to assist them and be a positive influence on them in life. So we should take a lot of pride in our names. We should learn the meaning of our names, learn to access the spiritual energies in our names, and use our names more, and especially a Jewish name. This applies to non-Jewish names also, but especially a Jewish name, which comes from the Lashon HaKodesh, the Hebrew language, the language of the Torah. Let me conclude with one more very beautiful idea about names. The Mishnah in Tractate Avot and Teachings of Our Fathers, Ethics of Our Fathers says, Rabbi Shimon says there are three crowns. Three crowns. The crown of Torah, the crown of being a Kohen, a priest, and the crown of Malchut, the crown of kingship. Three kinds of leadership. If you're a Torah scholar, if you're a Kohen, if you're a king. However, Keser Shem Tov Ole Al Gabehem is a fourth crown that transcends, is more powerful, is more influential than all of those three crowns. What's that fourth crown? The crown of a good name, of a good reputation. A name which you have turned into a good name. What does that mean? Well, here is a medrash, Tanchuma, that says, this is very beautiful. It says, every person has three kinds of names. You have the name that your parents gave you, and your parents refer to you. Then you have the name that other people refer to you as or think about you. And then you have, thirdly and lastly, the name which you have created or acquired for yourself. And that third name is greater than the other two names. We may be talking about the same name. Your parents called you Moshe, your friends call you Moshe, and you call yourself Moshe. It could be. Often friends, especially kids growing up, they get nicknames, right? I was growing up, I was called a lot of last names for some reason. My kids do the same thing. I was called Wolfa growing up, or Wolfie. Also, we should encourage our kids to identify themselves and with their friends with their real name and their first names. But here is as follows. Your parents named you Moshe, your parents named you Dinah. And that was a powerful revelation, a powerful prophecy they received about you, that's your name, and that's the intentions that your parents had. Then your friends call you Moshe, your friends call you Dinah, and they mean what they mean, and their intentions when they call you that, and what they see in you. But then you call yourself Moshe or Dinah. You create your name. You turn your name Moshe or Dinah or any name, and you give it a new life. You give it your identity. You give it your meaning. You give it your interpretation. You take it and you use it to be proud of. You use it to influence. You use it to tell you and to empower you to live how you want and how you should. And it becomes a powerful force within you. And then you elevate it and you create a new story. You create your story. Your story is not the story that your parents are giving you. But this is a very psychological thing here also. Who are you? Your parents made you, fine. And then you're a product of your parents. And then your friends make you also because you're very affected by your society. But don't be what your parents want you to be. And don't be what your friends expect you to be, but be who you want to be or expect to be. Create your own name. So, of course, this is the actual Jewish name that you're given. Enjoy it, be proud of it, use it, learn about it, and run with it. But more importantly, turn that name into your name, not just something that you receive from others. Make it your story, be proud of it, open yourself up to its meaning, its interpretations, its blessings, and allow it to positively influence you so that you can maximize your potential and live your true destiny, your true name in this world. So that's the power of your name. Thank you for joining us this evening, my friends. And God bless you. Have a good night. Next week, same time, same channel. Have a good night. Stay safe.